Happy Thanksgiving, class. Mr. Smith here. I told you before we left that you would have 1 to 2 videos. Here's your first one. Um, this one, we're starting a new unit. Unit 5 is on imperialism. This unit will talk about imperialism, progressive movement, as well as World War One. All right. So all I really want to do right here today is kind of break down the causes of imperialism, and then lead us up to the Spanish-American War. All right. So the main question that we have to ask ourselves is why did America join this imperialist club at the end of the 19th century? As you're all familiar with modern world history, Europe in the late 1800s and even a little bit before that is very preoccupied with taking over territories, expansion, acquiring as much resources and as many territory islands as possible. All right. And so America gets into this game a little bit late. I think of imperialism kind of like hungry, hungry hippos. Okay. If you think about it in the game Hungry, Hungry Hippos, everybody's trying to get as many marbles as possible, and the one with the most marbles wins. That's the same thing as imperialism. All these countries are trying to get territories, these little islands, these uncivilized or um, territories, and the one that has the most wins. Right? So when we talk about why American gets involved, first and probably the most important reason is commercial or business interests. All right. If you look here at the chart, U.S. foreign investments are going to triple, quadruple itself from 1897 all the way to 1908. But the main emphasis here is they're trying to acquire um, more wealth. We want to be able to trade, find goods that we can trade. All right, we want a place, to trade all our manufactured goods, as well as we want a place to acquire new goods. All right, and again, here again is just showing some more. You can see the rise in exports um, is definitely higher than the rise in imports. Um, but as we expand, we're obviously going to find more and more stuff that we want to get. Excuse me. Okay. Now, the second reason is military or strategic interests. Okay, if you look at all these little islands, we consider these islands, the Pacific coast and then the Caribbean, as kind of like stepping stones to Asia. Asia is the hot commodity. That's where everything is. That's where we want to try to get to. We want access to China in the Asian territories so we can get the spices and the silks and all the um, finer goods. All right, and so these islands like Guam and Wake and Midway and Hawaii, those are simply like gas stations. Think of the Pacific Ocean like I-95. All right, go down I-95 on your way to the beach or wherever, going north, and every 20 miles is a new rest stop. It's a place to fuel up, use the bathroom, whatever. Same thing here. When we're sending our ships to Asia to sell our goods, we need a place to stop and refuel and get stuff. All right. Now, in terms of uh, the Caribbeans, this is more strategically defensive maneuvers here. We want to be able to acquire these territories to protect us from other countries who are trying to get into South America. All right. And so you see at the bottom here, author named Alfred T. Mahan. He writes a very important book called The Influence of Sea Power in History. And what he basically does with this book is express America's um, naval interests, right? And he kind of illustrates about how every great empire had a strong navy, and that if we were going to expand and to grow as a country, we had to develop our navy and develop our naval interests. And so that's the other reason, the more that we are getting involved with other um, countries outside of America, the more readyable our military needs to be. And so some of these are again for military purposes of refueling, state, naval stations, things like that. Other parts of our defense strategic interests. All right. Thirdly, there's a social Darwinist thinking. All right. We talked about social Darwinism within the Industrial Revolution, and we talked about how it's this attitude that survival of the fittest, that you have to keep on adapting and growing to get bigger and better as a company or entrepreneur, or somebody's going to outdo you. Well, they kind of taken that thought and applied it towards imperialism. That, because we are bigger and better than most of these smaller countries or territories, therefore it gives us the right to conquer them. Okay? So the social Darwinist thinking really is a cop out, but it is a viable excuse for going out and acquiring more territories. Right? But what comes from that is this white man's burden. If you remember Ricky Tivi Tavi or The Jungle Book, you know, uh, the writer Rudyard Kipling, he also writes this poem called The White Man's Burden, about how it's the white man's responsibility to care for his little brown brothers. Meaning, you know, these countries, these territories are um, under civilized, and they're not as um, developed as we are, and so therefore it's our responsibility to go and care for them and to develop them and help watch over them, right? Just as with most territories, there is also religious or missionary interests. Um, you see there in the two pictures, American churches will go over to China to try to Christianize them. But that there is that play on God, how they use God as a reason for uh, our expansion outside of North America. All right. The fifth reason is the closing of the American frontier. We talked about Frederick Douglass Turner and his thesis about how the American West is closing, and therefore, you know, we need to develop and expand because our borders are now occupied from one to the other. And you see here in the map all the Native American lands that are ceded to the American government. So really, there's nowhere else in North America for us to expand or to develop. And so therefore, that we need to go elsewhere beyond North America. Now, um, just continuing with this thing, our imperialist attitudes begin with Japan, and they begin roughly around the time of the Civil War. All right. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry is going to approach the Japanese to try to set up a relationship, a trade relationship. Now, Japan was the lone isolated country in the Pacific, and it wasn't that they were underdeveloped, but they had no desire to industrialize, to grow. All right, and they had the only European contact that they had was with Denmark, which they've had for hundreds of years. Right, and the Dutch were rather very peaceful. Okay, well, Commodore Perry comes to the Japanese to set up a trade agreement, and it doesn't go well very at first. All right, and then Matthew Perry pretty much forces the Japanese to open up their harbors for American ships. Otherwise, he was going to bombard Tokyo. Okay, so what comes of this is the Treaty of Kanagawa. I guess that's how you pronounce it. That basically, like I said, opens up trade with Japan. Really good movie to kind of show you the difference and understand the impacts of our relationship with Japan is The Last Samurai, another Tom Cruise movie. It kind of shows you at the beginning of industrialization for Japan, and then by the end, um, you can see Japan really industrialized. And that's kind of how it was. It was an overnight change for them. Now, as they open the doors for us, they also expect us to open the doors for them. But um, as we are with many minority groups, Americans don't take kindly to foreigners moving into North America. And so, with the rash increase in Japanese immigrants, by 1908, uh, we're going to create what's called the Gentleman's Agreement. Basically, it's a Japanese note agreeing to deny passports to laborers entering the U.S. All right, so no Japanese is allowed to come to America. All right, uh, The Japanese are going to recognize that America has the right to exclude Japanese immigrants, all right? And U.S. in return is going to rescind their order to segregate Asians in separate schools. So it was a compromise, but the main deal of it is that no more Japanese were allowed to come into America at this time. All right, this is going to take part in what's called the Root Takahara Agreement. Okay, now continuing this theme here, Henry Cabot Lodge, one of the leading senators, is going to create what they call the Lodge Corollary, which is just an amendment to the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, basically it says non-European powers like Japan would not be allowed to own territory in the Western Hemisphere. Um, there's no real legality of this, um, but obviously our military was a little bit more powerful than Japanese, so they're not going to challenge it. All right, moving on to Alaska. Alaska was bought by William Seward in 1867 for $7.2 million. At the time, everybody thought it was a big joke and didn't think it was very useful. They couldn't see the benefits of paying that much money for that amount of territory. Okay, in fact, it was called Seward's Icebox or Seward's Folly. All right, obviously we get the better end of that deal. All right, last part that we want to talk about um, today is Hawaii. Okay, Hawaii, like I said before, is kind of like a stepping stone, a rest stop, so to speak, at the crossroads of the Pacific. Okay, Americans had been in Hawaii since the late 1820s, first as missionary groups, just trying to spread Christianity. Okay, but one of the things that Hawaii has is they have great fruit, not grapefruit, but great fruit crops. Um, they're very successful at raising pineapples and other citrus fruit, as well as growing sugar. Right, and so a lot of American businesses started to venture into Hawaii to develop a market in the fruit business. Okay, by 1849, America had so many different businesses invested in Hawaii that they were able to get the government to consider Hawaii as a U.S. protectorate, meaning if something were to happen, America would protect it. Okay. Now, towards the end of Hawaii's independence, they had Queen Liliuokalani. Okay, she was actually American educated. She was the last queen of Hawaii, and when she took the throne, she was really adamant on trying to get Hawaii to be for Hawaiians. All right, to push the Americans out, or at least reduce the Americans' role in the Hawaiian government. Right? Obviously, the American businesses are not going to take kindly to that. All right, and so this gentleman here with a cool beard um, is going to organize a couple of treaties. All right, and then really what happens is by 1890, the McKinley tariff is going to raise the amounts on tariffs. Well, this gentleman here, Sanford Dole of the Dole Fruit Company, he's an American, but because Hawaii is not an American territory, he has to pay the tariff to bring his fruit into America. So this is going to cause a great um, scuffle, in Congress. And so Sanford Dole is going to work to create a revolution, so to speak. There wasn't any type of fighting. There was obviously the threat of fighting, and what happens is Queen Lululukulani, she leaves the island, and she actually exiles to Seattle. But Sanford Ballard Dole then proclaims Hawaii an independent nation, and it will actually be recognized by a couple of countries. All right, there's this big celebration um, about Hawaii becoming its own country. Now, 4 years later, though, um, again a part of the original plan, Dole is going to negotiate an annexation in the Senate, meaning when they annex a territory, they take it in, they make it part of them. So Hawaii becomes part of the United States in 1898. And that's where we'll stop today.